And speaking more specifically, obviously, to coronavirus, we're in a state right now where we can't talk confidently about what the prospective candidates are going to look like a few months from now, maybe even a week from now. We're going to have new data that we're working with. But, at least the most recent headline, which probably doesn't feed well into this discussion of vaccine hesitancy, was the AstraZeneca development of voluntarily pausing their trial, right, to review a severe adverse event that they observed in a UK participant. As someone who published on that news and wrote it up and followed up on it, just anecdotally speaking, the response and feedback that we're getting from social media audience members was very predictable relative to our understanding of vaccine hesitancy, almost as if this singular instance of scrutinous care of a candidate was actually evidence for their opinion that none of them are safe. It's just a very difficult thing to get across. And I've noticed that with talking to vaccinologists right now, that they're trying to explain that, all this reporting, all this scrutiny, this is actually pretty much par for the course. It's just that it's happening at such an accelerated rate. And it's happening for something that we're still trying to interpret as a disease that maybe that's kind of harboring the greater hesitancy and stoking fear that we have with a vaccine
Well,
candidate.
you bring up some great points. I mean, from my perspective, the fact that the trial was halted shows that the system is working,
Yeah.
right? That's why we do phase 3 trials. And we're looking for things that we didn't necessarily anticipate, although we also look for things that we do anticipate. We have the advantage of a randomized control group, and those data are carefully monitored by a data safety and monitoring board. And so to me, it shows the system works. I mean, we know that there are vaccines that make it from phase 1 into phase 2 or from phase 2 into phase 3, and they don't move forward because there's problems either around efficacy or safety. So from my perspective, it shows the system works. I'd be much more concerned if there were cases of severe adverse reactions and it didn't hold the trial. But a lot of this is about understanding how the system works. And I don't think we've done a good job of explaining to people, including clinicians, what the system looks like, how we develop vaccines. And we have a long and very successful history in doing this well.
Yeah.
We don't see vaccines that are licensed and routinely recommended in the US that cause common serious adverse reactions. And that shows the system works well. People don't understand it. And I think the name Operation Warp Speed, by emphasizing speed, gives the impression that there's shortcuts being taken. And in terms of phase trials, that's not the case. And the phase 3 trials are fairly large, about 30,000 people. It's good size. Bigger is better. You can study things that are less common when they're larger. You can look at subpopulations when they're larger. We also have a system for studying safety once a vaccine is licensed, which is fairly robust, and it's really important. It's really important because there's things that won't come out in clinical trials, either because they're not common or they occur in subpopulations or have delayed onset. And that's where we rely on these large databases looking at vaccine safety. And again, this is a system which is not well understood by the public or clinicians. Around H1N1, I was at the National Vaccine Program Office, and I was responsible for overseeing the safety system and the surveillance for H1N1 vaccines. And we published a supplement to pediatrics where we describe each of these systems and what they look like and how they work and how they complement each other, because it's really important for clinicians to understand what is done and how it's done.
Right, absolutely. It's something maybe from the top down that we need to address. For all the frustrations that I've been hearing for a few years now from physicians as to managing the anti-vaccination or vaccine hesitancy discussion with particular patients. There has been a greater concession during all this that maybe we need to change up our message. And Dr. Salmon, if we're looking for, I guess, tangible resolutions in the middle of a pandemic when these candidates are coming down the line. I think Pfizer came out this week and said, they're hoping to have an option available before the new year, right? And that kind of accelerates the timeline just a little bit more. And it leads to us needing to have greater discussions and understanding and to some extent collaboration with these more at-risk populations who are going to be prioritized first, right? What exactly could we be doing tangibly to, I guess, share a better or improved message, a more clear message?
Well, you bring up a lot of points. For one, I would distinguish between anti-vaccine and vaccine hesitant. Very few people are truly anti-vaccine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 1, maybe 2% of the population that are ideologically opposed to vaccines. And those people are going to be very hard for anyone to work with, whether it be a clinician or the FDA. But you have, a third or more of the public that is hesitant around vaccines. And often their concerns intuitively make sense. They may be legitimate concerns from a scientific standpoint, or maybe not, maybe just from a parent's perspective. If you look at, for example, the number of vaccines we give an infant, it feels like a lot, it does. And you have this infant that you're charged with protecting, and you're putting all these needles in that child, and it feels like a bad thing, and it feels like a lot. Now, that's not consistent with the evidence. We've done very careful studies to show that the immunization schedule is exceedingly safe for children, but that feeling among parents does not make them anti-vaccine. It makes them concerned. And how we address that really matters. Clinicians need to listen to the concerns of parents. They need to establish trust and empathy with them. I mean, the first step is to take a presumptive approach, because vaccines are the standard of care. So the clinician should be saying, hey, today we're giving your child these vaccines, not these vaccines are recommended. Do you want to get them? Right? The former is a presumptive approach. The latter really opens the door for people to refuse. And so start with a presumptive approach. I mean, it's a standard of care. And for those that come back with concerns, the first step is to address that concern, but to establish a trusting relationship. And how you do that is really important. So if a parent comes in and says, I'm worried about the ingredients in vaccines, the clinician shouldn't say, well, I understand why you're worried about the ingredients in vaccines, because even if you go on to debunk that myth, you're still reinforcing it. But instead, the clinician can say, well, I understand why you want to make sure that everything that goes in your baby's body is safe. Well, that makes sense, right? And there's a way of establishing trust and empathy, and then go on to address that concern and do it in the context of the risk of disease, the benefit of a vaccine, and the ability of the parent to protect the child. So how the clinician talks to a parent really matters. And I think that answers your question in terms of what we can do.